Okay, welcome everybody. Just as we're waiting for a few more people to join us, I'll just go over the format of this afternoon. So this is a webinar, so we're in the Zoom webinar mode. So your microphones will be muted, but if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. If you've got any questions for Malcolm, our speaker, you can put those in the Q&A. All of the slides will be sent to you after the session. So we'll make a start. So this is the first in our series of the Leadership of SEND, Building a Culture of Collective Responsibility. This is our first session today. So my name's Sarah Watson and I'm the Deputy Regional SEND Lead for the North team. And hopefully by now you have an understanding of what whole school SEND is. So I've just put the contract aims up there. We're really focusing on equipping our school to meet the training needs in relation to SEND, and hopefully you've seen our CPT calendar for the autumn term. It's packed with lots of different events and there'll be a link to that at the end. Okay, so this is the first in our series of 3 webinars on Leadership of SEND. We've got part 1 today looking at data, the key pillars of leadership, and really looking how we can promote that sense of collective responsibility within our settings. Parts 2 and 3 are upcoming. Session 2 is going to really focus on Ofsted, which, although Ofsted's always in the front of everyone's minds, we're obviously using Ofsted here as a way to drive forward school improvement. And we're going to be looking at case studies from SENCO colleagues who've had recent Ofsted inspections in this term, and reflecting on questions they were asked and how they prepared themselves for that process, really. Moving on to after Christmas, seems like a long time away, but we're going to be looking at a range of case studies and we're going to focus on curriculum and phase leadership in that session. So please see this first session as a part of 3, and we're hoping you're going to come back for 2 and 3 and you've signed up for those as well. So our objectives today, it is really focused on our understanding of SEND leadership, how this can be promoted, and we'll look at the SEND Code of Practice, with a real focus on middle and phase leaders. Malcolm's going to go through how SEND data can be used effectively by all leaders. And then we're also going to look at some self-evaluation and reflection tools and templates. And hopefully this will give you some takeaways from the session. So when you go back to your settings and you're discussing with colleagues, you can reflect on your own practice, and that should help us going into the second session, which is a bit more Ofsted prep focused. Okay, so I'm delighted to introduce Malcolm Reeve. Malcolm's got a wealth of experience. He's a national SEND leader and he's worked across a range of settings, mainstream, special, and he is our data expert today. He's going to go through all things data and he's going to end with a little bit of an Ofsted focus. So Malcolm, I'll stop sharing my screen and then it will be over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. Hope you'll find this helpful. I'm just sharing my screen. My aim is to talk to you for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have some opportunity to pick up on things in the chat. But what I'm going to do is, as we go through, every now and then, I'm just going to say pause for 10 seconds or so that you can put any comments you like. You can put comments in all the time through the chat, but there'll be a little pause at the end of each, if you like, section of this. So I'm really pleased that the title of this series of CPD is Building a Culture of Collective Responsibility, because it fits in with what we've been saying in Whole School SEND for some time about encouraging every leader to be a leader of SEND, and the knowledge that being a leader of SEND doesn't start or end with the SENCO in a school. So I hope you'll find this presentation helpful. And thinking about that, every leader, a leader of SEND, it sort of builds on the phrase, every teacher, a teacher of SEND. You won't find the phrase, every teacher, a teacher of SEND in the Code of Practice. That it sort of arrived on the education scene, if you like, sometime in 2015 or 16. I think 2015, after the Code of Practice was published, the first version in September 2014. And but what you will find is high quality teaching, as you can see, differentiated for individual pupils is the first step that you can see at 6.37. What this is about how can we have collective responsibility for SEND in a school, not think that the SEND service in a school or the provision begins and ends with the SENCO, but how we can get all leaders to the table. So if you're a SENCO on this call, I hope you'll receive some information which will help you in your role to support all other leaders to become leaders of SEND, and some tools that will help you. And if you are already a leader in a school and you know, you're not the SENCO, then I'm hoping you're going to find this informative and helpful. And I'm going to share with you through the course of the webinar some thinking on each of these 6 pillars. I suppose there's a phrase, there's many ways, was it to string a cat or whatever that phrase is. You could set out, well, what does SEND leadership in a school look like by thinking about it in many different ways. But what I'm trying to say is there are 6 things and the tools associated with them that if they were in place in schools in England, mainstream schools in particular, I'm thinking, then it would really support a whole school approach and collective responsibility around SEND. So we're going to start with pillar 1, which is the SEND Code of Practice. Statutory guidance for all schools in England, latest version January 2015, so getting on for 7 years old now. A new version will probably follow the SEND review that's currently taking place, and that's likely to be, as I understand it, in 2023. But for now, this is what we're working with. And what I'm promoting as a starting point is that understanding what's in the SEND Code of Practice is everyone's responsibility. Certainly all middle leaders in a school and senior leaders in a school, all leaders undoubtedly. And yet it's often seen as the preserve of the SENCO. The SENCO would know about the SEND Code of Practice, and I think we have to get beyond that. So I'm promoting in this first pillar that all leaders in schools will have a working knowledge of the SEND Code of Practice, Chapter 6, entitled Schools, and Chapter 5 if you're in an early years setting, because that's what Chapter 5 is about. But let's say Chapter 6 in schools, and you'll give it high status in your school. And my analogy with high status is on the balloon there, keeping children safe in education, which is required reading for us all. And we have to sign it, we have all read it, and we all have to know what's in it so that we can keep children safe. And I guess I'm thinking, let's sign Chapter 6 of the Code of Practice so that everybody in the school understands what they can do and should be doing in terms of SEND. The Code of Practice is 292 pages long, so it's a long document. We're only talking about one chapter, which we can easily read in the course of about 20 minutes, because it's only 18 pages long. And this slide sets out some key points from the Code of Practice, which I think are required understanding by all leaders in schools, and certainly in the theme of this today, middle leaders and senior leaders, phase leaders, whoever you regard as a leader in your particular setting. I think these are the things one really needs to know. The reason I highlighted those in yellow was because I think they're the particular things that have major impact on outcomes for children if they're implemented properly. So if we're really focusing in on not just systems and processes, but the things which make a big difference to children, then those would be the 6 that I'd pick out. I'm going to go through them, these ones in the middle, in a little bit more detail. If you're somebody on this call and you want to know a bit more about the other ones that I've not highlighted in yellow, then just put that in the chat. Rachel or Sarah will pick it up. I will be showing you, although I haven't highlighted here, patterns of identification and data on that in a moment. So 6.4 is covered. I just want to make a comment about reasonable adjustments, first of all, and then I'll get on to 6.15. Reasonable adjustments for people with, for children with SEND or just SEN. Children with disabilities would certainly require a reasonable adjustment, and in my thinking, that's every child with an education, health and care plan would be a child with a recognised disability. When you come to the SEN support population, it can it's a matter of judgment, and it's often a matter of judgment of the young person, whether they regard themselves as having a disability or their parents. But the law is that reasonable adjustments under the Equality Act are required for children who have a physical or mental impairment which is long-term and affects their capacity or capability to carry out normal day-to-day activities, which you might regard in our context as the normal day-to-day activities in a school. Long-term is defined by something which is has lasted or is likely to last more than 1 year. So you can see how that could apply to a lot of children with SEN. Understanding the reasonable adjustments that you're making and making those reasonable adjustments is really important, and is now, I might just add, part of the Ofsted Inspection framework. So I want to talk to you about different from or additional to. The Code of Practice says children with a child has a special educational need if special education provision is called for. What is special educational provision? Special educational provision is something different from or additional to what other children without a special educational need are receiving in school. So I find it quite helpful to think of those two, those 4 words, different from, additional to, in all our thinking about children with SEN. And so if you're a leader, a middle leader in a school, a phase leader, whatever, I won't keep saying all the different types of leaders. If you're a leader in a school, are you clear about what the children are receiving, which is different from or additional to? And I guess if we're talking about collective responsibility, we're not talking about just the SENCO knowing that. You'd expect the SENCO to know that. It's part of their role to know what's going on that's different from or additional to. But the challenge here is, if you're a leader, you need to be aware of that. I did this little template, which you might like, to use if you found it helpful. You can edit it, you can change the words. And is asking you 4 questions about what might be different from or additional to in the phase that you work, or the subject that you're leading, or indeed in the school that the whole school that you're working on. So it's about curriculum adaptation to meet the needs of children with SEND. What additional support is in place over and above what the high quality teaching that's in place, if there is additional support in place, how teaching's adapted to meet needs, and what does the graduated approach look like? We'll talk about the graduated approach in a minute. So 6.15 says, a Code of Practice tells us about different from, additional to. What's your response this invites you to do? Your response is, what do we think about this? How can I articulate what's happening in this case, in those 4 questions? And what would be the evidence of impact? The evidence that it's taking place and the evidence of the impact it's having. And are you clear on that? So those questions, in a sense, don't require you to be an expert on SEND. You don't need to be the SENCO or an expert in the field of SEND to answer those questions. You just need to know what's going on there. You might go to the SENCO for additional advice. This one, 6.21, I'm going through in order that they cropped up. So 6.15 was additional, different from, additional to. 6.21 is about behaviour, and it's just something we all ought to bear in mind, that that 6.21 of the Code of Practice reminds us that when a child is exhibiting a change in behaviour or challenging behaviours, then consideration at least ought to be given as to whether the child has a special educational need. And I put it to you that how your behaviour or disciplinary considerations in the school, your policies, your codes of conduct, whatever it is you have, they need to work alongside a consideration of children with SEND and the implications of the Equality Act. Why do I say children with SEND and implications of the Equality Act? So children, some children with SEND may find it difficult to observe some of the policies on behaviour and discipline in a school. And some children will have a disability and find it difficult to observe those. And we have to be aware of that in our whole school approach and think, how do we need to modify our behaviour policy or adapt its implementation to meet the needs of pupils with SEND? It's not about, tolerating a range of disruptive behaviours in the school, but it is at least us saying to ourselves, we just need to be aware some children will find this difficult, and we need to think SEND around our behaviour policy and think, are we always helping them as best we can, and got reasonable adjustments and adaptations to the policy. We know that levels of fixed term and permanent exclusions for pupils with EHCPs or on SEN support are too high. Nationally, across the country, they're higher than children with no SEND, which is a little bit perverse, isn't it, when you think that children with SEND arguably are some of the most vulnerable children that we teach in schools, and yet they're excluded from school more than other children. And levels of attendance, of course, for pupils with EHCPs and those on SEN support are also lower. So all of this just needs to be considered in our collective responsibility around SEND. In the worst cases that I've seen, a child can be excluded, and if you trace it back, it's partly because of their SEND, or sometimes, unfortunately, because of their SEND, because they can't, in a sense, comply with what the rules are in the school. And the other bit of the worst part is that I've seen is where a behaviour disciplinary strand of in a school, the pastoral system, whatever you may want to call it, isn't talking enough with the SEND leaders in the school, the SENCO and other people that understand the SEND needs. And those two have to be completely joined up, is the point of me raising 6.21 behaviour and SEND. Jumping forward to 6.44, the graduated approach is a requirement to be in place for all children with SEND, complemented by the Education, Health and Care Plan annual review that also takes place for those children who have education, health and care plans, and that happens annually on the anniversary of their when they first had their EHCP. But assess, plan, do review, what we call the graduated approach needs to be in place, and alongside it, teachers and support staff working with a child need to have a good knowledge of the graduated approach. So one good question to ask is, how is the graduated approach being implemented in your school, and is it being applied consistently? Do all teachers understand the needs of every child with SEND in the school, or at least the children that they teach, and therefore they're in a position to implement what's in the graduated approach? And how do you communicate that in your school to all teachers to make sure they're on board? It's no point putting the documents on a hard drive for staff to look at if they don't ever use it and look at it. So is it really working in practice? 6.37, are you clear about high quality teaching strategies for children with SEND? What strategies are in place for children with SEND in your area of responsibilities? That could be across the whole school, if you're the SENCO or the head teacher. It could be across a phase, it could be across a subject. And I've deliberately been a bit provocative with the writing in blue there. What are you personally doing to, oh, that's a typo, to monitor and quality assure that teaching? So you don't have to be an expert in SEND. This, as I've said, this training isn't about becoming an expert in SEND. It's about becoming a leader of SEND. Leaders aren't experts in everything. They are people who make sure things happen, and that make sure that things are in place, and they have skills that they can bring to the table to ensure that happens. But I don't know any leaders who would profess to be the expert in everything. So you're not expecting your middle leaders or your senior leaders to be experts in SEND, but you are expecting to lead on it. And one of the ways they can lead on it is monitor and quality assure the teaching. So what high quality teaching strategies are in place for children in the school? And on a learning walk, walking around, anybody can do that and see, is there something different from or additional to going on for children with SEND, and see what's actually being implemented in the school. The expertise comes in when you're advising a teacher about different strategies or different approaches, which is where one would then go and revert to the SENCO. I like to think of these 4 things that every teacher in the country in any school should know. And these are the questions that I might ask if I was on a learning walk in a school. I want to know that the teacher knows who the children with SEND are. I want to know that they know if the child is on SEN support or has an education, health and care plan. And I want to know that they know what the main area of SEN need is for that child. We'll go through areas of SEN need in a moment, but fundamentally, is it a cognition need? Is it a communication need? Is it a social and emotional or a mental health need, or a sensory or physical need? Not trying to use too many labels, but why do you want to know what a need of a child is? Because if it's a communication need, then that's going to influence your practice. If it's a cognition need, that's going to influence the way you deliver a lesson. So teachers need to know that. And point 4, I've just put 3 different questions. Choose the one that makes most sense for you. So for the teacher, the question you'd ask is, how are you supporting learning? Or what are you doing, teacher, that's different from or additional to for each of the children? Or how are you delivering the child's graduated response? All 3 apply. You wouldn't, you would just ask maybe one of them. But those 4 things, anybody can do a learning walk, and anybody can ask those questions, and quality assure that's in place. It's not the role of the SENCO only to do learning walks for children with SEND. It's all leaders' responsibility. So I'll just pause there. I'm going to go, you can see I flashed up pillar 2, which I'm going to go on to. This is a 10-second pause where you can put anything in the chat about that. I'd particularly be interested to know whether you're in agreement that raising the profile of the SEND Code of Practice Chapter 6 in schools is a good idea or not, and you think you could take that forward. And I hope what I've done by just sort of elaborating on a few of the paragraphs from Chapter 6, I've given you an opportunity to see some of what the important ones are and how you could ask questions. I've just literally a few seconds pause. And I think Sarah and Rachel and Fran are going to just see if there's anything in there, and they'll pick it up, and we'll get to that when we chat at the end if we can do, or they'll respond on the chat. Okay, so let's move on to pillar 2, and this is called a strategic overview of SEND, and it's about having an overview of the SEND population in the school. It's about having the overview at a whole school level, and it's also about having it at individual phase level, whatever. So the starting point for leaders coming to the table of SEND, if I can phrase it that way, is that they know the 4 broad areas of need from the SEND Code of Practice. So quite rhetorical question, because you can't respond to me. Does every leader in your school know the 4 broad areas of need from the SEND Code of Practice? And if they don't, then they need to. And why do they need to? Again, it's not about knowing a label. It's about every single child in this country is identified under with SEND, who is identified under those 4 broad areas of need, and you need to know the proportion in your school of different types of SEN. It'll affect your teaching practice, it'll affect your CPD, and in your phase, if you're a middle leader listening into this, it'll affect your subject or whatever area you're covering. So the 4 broad areas of need, the patterns of SEND identification in the school compared to national patterns, and ensure that identification is built into your overall approach to monitoring the progress and development of all pupils. Apart from the first one, know the 4 broad areas of need, they're not my words, they're the words from the Code of Practice at 6.4 and 6.5. It wants you to compare your patterns of identification with national patterns. It wants you to use that to reflect and reinforce on the quality of teaching, and it's part of your overall approach. This is what I would call fundamental knowledge, basic knowledge for a leader in a school in England. A document comes out every year. It's called SEN in England. In this case, this is the up-to-date version, 2021. It's the document that's based on the January census. So you might see, if I wiggle my arrow up here, we've got Special Educational Needs in England, January 2021, published June 2021. The data is submitted by your school in January of every year. You'll be doing it in a couple of months' time. Again, you will submit to the Department for Education the numbers of children with SEN in your school, numbers on SEN support, numbers with education, health and care plans, and the primary category of need, primary category of SEN need of every one of those children, according to 13 criteria, or 13 categories of need set out in the DFE census. Now, we can all have a discussion about, well, really difficult to choose one category. Children have multiple needs across lots of categories, but this is the law in the land in schools. So people have to do it. The data's released, the January data's released in July, or in this case, it was early this year. It came out on the 24th of June. And this is the page on the right-hand side where you can see all the data and download data. I'm not suggesting to you that you go and do all that if you're a leader. I just want you to know that this exists and this is where you can pick up the data, because I've got the data here for you. So these are the 4 broad areas of need. Make sure every leader knows them. And this is the breakdown of primary and secondary schools combined in England. It's very difficult, by the way, to do comparative data for special schools. I do that as well, but it's difficult to compare, because when you compare one special school with another special school, or an alternative provision or PRU with another one, you're not comparing like with like. So it's more straightforward to compare primary with secondary schools. This is a reference slide. It's just it's simply there. Many of you will know this, and I won't be showing you anything new, but what I am showing you is a leadership tool that you might use. It sets out the relationship between the 4 broad areas of need, SEN need, from the Code of Practice, set out at the bottom here, and all these 13 primary categories of need. And this is the percentage that it is in all schools. If you did all schools in England, 24,413, I think there are, all these schools, and this is how they break down. And you can see there are a big 5 that most children, 80 to 90% of children, fit into these 4 categories: specific learning difficulties, moderate learning difficulties, social, emotional, mental health needs, speech, language and communication needs, and ASD. And it's got the writing on the side color coded for you. So use it as a reference slide, put it up in the office, in the head teacher's office, other leaders' office, and so you can begin to get your head around it. But start with the 4 broad areas. This is the breakdown of the 4 broad areas in primary and secondary. I'm not going to talk to you about the comparison between the 2 and why the secondary is so different. It's quite an interesting subject to get into, but in the time I've got available, I'm just going to say to you, how do you use this? Well, if you're in the primary phase, we would expect, if you were at the national pattern, 42% of your children to have a communication or interaction need. Just under a third, 28%, to have a cognition and learning need, a fifth, just under, to have a social, emotional, mental health need, and about 5 or 6% to have a sensory and physical need. And I won't run through those. You can see those on the side if you're from a secondary phase. But the questions to ask are, well, how does your pattern compare to that pattern? How does it play out? Are you identifying a similar pattern in your school? If not, and if I use the phrase, if not, why not, then that doesn't mean that you should be identifying this exact pattern. These aren't targets for you to aim for. They're simply your opportunity to compare and ask questions. What's your service and where's your expertise? So you can ask that at whole school level or at phase or subject level. This is just how they play out. Use it as a reference slide. It just breaks down, where do the 42% of children in primary schools with communication interaction needs come from? Well, 32, nearly 33% of them have speech and language and communication needs, and just under 10% have an autism spectrum disorder. Don't like the phrase disorder, but that's what the category means. Anyway, so you can see how these are set out. It's the same 5 big areas in primary and secondary. This is just reference. Moving on through it, we could talk for a long time about it, or I could, and if we were in a conference, we could have a great discussion about it. But this is just setting out SEN support, EHCPs, the percentage in primary schools in England in 2021, the 4 broad areas of need, and the primary category needs. So you've really got everything you need on there if you want to examine your population and think, what do they look like? What does our population look like compared to this population? And all the time that you would be sharing this and talking about in your school, you're improving people's understanding of SEND and their collective responsibility. That's the pattern in secondary schools and how it pans out. This is the bang up-to-date data in England, and it won't be updated again until sort of summer of 2022. So you can use this information for the rest of your year. This is a tool that I produce for schools, and what it's showing is when the code of practice of 6.4 is saying to you, compare your patterns with national, the best way to do it is to think of it in terms of national SEN support and education, health and care plans, which are denoted by K for SEN support, E for education, health and care plans, if you're not familiar with that. The 4 broad areas of need and the primary categories of need. And on here is shown, this is national secondary data in red, and the school that I recently prepared this set of graphs for in green. So, you know, you can ask yourself some great questions as a leader about this. You know, why are we in this school identifying such a relatively high percentage of children with MLD, moderate learning difficulties? Why have we only got 1.6% of our children with speech and language communication needs against 12% in a secondary school in England, and so on? You wouldn't jump to they're over-identifying or they're under-identifying, but you can ask the questions. And this is one that just shows some other graphs that come from that tool, which show the breakdown in a year. So, you know, the question I would ask about this is, look at the 15 children here in this school in year 8 who have social, emotional and mental health needs. Question, what are the implications for curriculum and teaching? Who teaches those children? What are the strategies they're using? They're a significant group in year 8. And you could ask the same of the 6 children with specific learning difficulties in year 7. So you can use data like that to really inform your thinking around SEND. And I'll close that. Take this as my 10-second pause. I'm not going to pause because I just want to whiz through, but put your comment on that. Do you find it helpful? I've tried to show you how you can take national data and use it in a, you know, at a school level, and even down in the slide in front of you to a class level to think about your practice. And I think having this sort of analysis available to you in a school as a leader is really informative and helpful. And it stops people thinking, may I say, if they're not versed in SEND, by thinking, these are how our SEND children are doing, or these are our SEND children. And it goes a bit deeper because we start to talk about the particular needs of children rather than just as though there's some homogenous cohort. So I don't know if any of you put any questions in there or chat, but no doubt it's being monitored, and I hope you find that that pillar helpful. This is the third pillar, and it's about a structured review of SEND that really is saying, look, if you're going to do well as a school, if you're going to improve as a school, or in anything that you would do as a school, you self-evaluate where you are and you make a plan, and then you move forward. And so this is about the SEND review process. This is saying evaluate in your school, and in your case, if you're a middle leader, in your subject, in your phase, evaluate how you're doing in SEND. And I'm just going to show you how you can do that with some quick tools that you might find helpful. So here's the SEND review guide. This is the whole school SEND review guide. So normally would sit with the head teacher's responsibility to organise this with the SENCO. So I'm going to go from there down to leadership, other leaders. But that's the SEND review guide. There's the link to it, freely downloadable and freely editable, not got a copyright. It covers 8 areas of SEND in a school. You can see the headings for each of the 8 areas. You could choose to focus on one, which you know is a particular interest or concern to you in your school, or you could spend a day or two going through all of them. I produced this for middle leaders, and so I'm hoping some of you might take this as a starter point for something you might like to do. This is an extraction from 4 areas of that. I just showed you 8 areas, so 4 areas: leadership, quality of teaching, monitoring, tracking, evaluation, outcomes for pupils. And I took some of the statements from the more substantial whole school SEND review, but this is all from the whole school SEND review. And I'm inviting you to rag where you are. So red, amber, green it, put your colour in there, as it were, or the initial, and use it as a template for reviewing your area of responsibility for SEND, your area of responsibility, sorry, as a leader in the school. But use this to think about SEND. So I've called it the middle leaders phase or subject mini whole school SEND review. It's a bit of a mouthful, but you can change the title if you like. Strengths, identify what you think you're doing well. A review is not about finding all the things you do wrong. That's why it's called a review. It's not an audit. Find all the things you're doing well, and they're your strengths, and find all the areas for development, and then try and move forward on those. I've sent Sarah a Word version of this, and I think she's making arrangements to get this sent out with the slides. So, feel free to edit it, but it's a starter for you. And here's another one that focuses on an ambitious curriculum and high quality teaching. It asks a series of, actually not questions, they're statements around an ambitious curriculum and high quality teaching. So you could use this in any any phase in a school or any subject in a school. RAG, where you think you are, and then of course your reds are going to become some things you need to move forward with, and your greens are some things you can celebrate. So again, a review isn't all about, we as teachers, we're really good at knowing all the things we're not doing well and the ways we've got to improve. It's somehow built into our DNA to be a teacher. But we also need to take time to celebrate and recognise the things we do well, and that this is what this framework allows you to do. So two tools there. 3 in fact, if you count the whole school SEND review, the one that I showed you just there, middle leaders phase or subject mini review, and this one which just focusing on ambitious curriculum and high quality in teaching, quite high quality teaching. All of those are editable. This one's Sarah's got as a Word version as well, and she'll be making arrangements to send it out to you. So just 10-second pause. Anything on the review process? I'm hoping those 2 documents, particularly for middle leaders on the call, they find helpful in terms of reviewing what they're doing.
We've got a question in the chat, Malcolm, that might be worth answering.
Okay.
Rena's asked, when do you think is the best point in the year to conduct a review? If there is a point in the year, when would be best to do that?
I don't think there's my gut feeling is I don't think I could say there's a best point in a year to conduct a review. But what I do think is hitting the ground running in September of each year is a really good place to be. So I would want to conduct a review and have targets, goals, developments agreed, all set out before the summer holiday of a school year, so that I could run with them right from the beginning and get everybody on board and informed and all the rest of it. So that's not to say it should be done in the summer term, but it's certainly, I think you'd do it if you were going to do it, May time, the first half of the summer term, not the back end when everybody's tired, ready for the new school year, if I had to choose. But I don't think there's an honest answer. The other thing that you've got to do, obviously, in September of a school year is get to know the children that have come up from, that they've transitioned into your school, the new children. So you really need to lead that half term in a sense of people getting to know children and understanding, at least the new ones, the ones that were already there the previous year. Your good transition from year to year should already be in place for them, so you shouldn't have to do too much with them. So I'm thinking in that window, and like I say, there isn't a real answer to it, but it's important to start the year right. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so we're on pillar 4, and I'm just going to propose to you that in supporting a collective responsibility for SEND in the school and a collective understanding, a one-page overview of SEND containing the key information on the school is a helpful thing. And the one that we've got, a whole school SEND, is called SEND in a Nutshell. So you might have seen these before, I don't know. There's a primary school SEND in a nutshell. So not going to spend ages going through it. I've got a template for you to use later if you like the idea. So let me just orient you to it. The left-hand side, if you like, Sarah said at the beginning I'd be talking about data some of the time, and I have a bit on this identification data. So the left-hand side is all about data. It has those graphs I just showed you, which showed the patterns of identification in a school. In this case, it's a primary school, and it's 2020, not 2021 data, but it doesn't matter because the principle's the same. On the bottom left-hand side, we've got the 3 key metrics, in a sense, for children with SEND. I wouldn't say they're the only metrics that we want to know about children with SEND, but they are 3 key metrics. Absence rates, exclusion rates, and outcomes. And in this particular version, I've highlighted in green where a school is at or above the national comparator, and highlighted in red where a school's below. So that's quite a helpful thing to have. It's not a scoring. Red doesn't mean it's scoring. Maybe I should highlight it in blue or something, or purple, so nobody could confuse it as being a scoring for the school, but it's just helping the school to draw its attention to where it's below national, so that it can do something about it and have some development planning around it. On the right hand side is a completely different type of thinking. I don't know if this is left brain, right brain, or whatever that means, but this is not about data. This is about judgment. This is about something more soft intelligence, if you want to call it that. So, examples of high quality teaching, examples of training expertise, reasonable adjustments, inspiring co-production engagement with families, and the strengths and areas for development for SEND. So that's what it looks like, a primary version. Here's a secondary version. If I flick between the two, you'll see there's no difference, really. The only difference is down at the bottom on the left-hand side, where we've got these end of Key Stage 4 outcomes, attainment and progress 8, rather than all the outcomes indicators that are used in primary schools. Other than that, it's basically the same. Obviously, the national data for secondary is different. Here's a template for you to use. So those ones, by the way, folks, those ones are screenshots of ones that are about a year old, but actual ones of schools. This one is just a template for you to use. So here's a primary template. It it contains all the boxes. You can click in here. I can't click on here on the screen without stop sharing, and I don't want to do that in the middle of a webinar. But you can click in here and start using it straight away. You can insert your school logo in the middle where it says, and this 2018-19 data is the most up-to-date data there is because of the COVID pandemic. So there isn't updated data. We will all have in our profession updated data from the autumn of 2022. So this is the last set of data. And you can then insert your figures in here. And I haven't got time to go into it, but if you wanted your figures in there in the blank boxes, and you wanted to find those, you would use a document called your Analyze School Performance document to find those figures. Because that was published in 2018-19 as well. So that's where you go. I'll put the question in the if you're not familiar with that document, I would say get familiar with that document. If you haven't the faintest idea what I'm talking about, put it in the chat, and Sarah will let me know in a few minutes. And here's a second. Sorry, this is the one where I thought you could make a start on. Sorry. So you've got the data, this is primary, you've got the data on the left-hand side that I'm inviting you to populate, and you've got judgments and thoughts on the right-hand side. And here, again, this is a template. It's, what should I say, it's editable. You can take it, you download this slide, copy it, copy the slide into your own, once you get the presentation into your own PowerPoint, and you can start editing and using this. And I would say if you're a middle leader in a school, my view would be, if you just did this for your phase, your subject, your year, whatever it was, this would be a good starter with some key questions around SEND in a very, what should we say, not necessarily simple, because finding the answers to these questions isn't always simple, but it would be a great starter for you. And I've done the same for secondary. Here's a secondary template if you want to use it in a secondary school. So the difference being the data down there in the bottom left is the secondary school data, and here's the template you use. The template's exactly the same, but obviously the answer will be different. So that's a SEND in a nutshell. This is just to give you one idea about, put it in the chat if you think that's a good idea, the SEND in a nutshell, and you think that you could use it. That my new bit for you today was producing this as a template for you. So any comments you've got as to whether you would find it helpful to use that, or ways in which it can be improved, I'll be really happy to see them in the chat later. This bit is simply to show you a document which you may like and you may dismiss, but you need to have a development plan for SEND, that's for sure, and it needs to be threaded through the whole school development plan, or in your phase, your subject development plan. Don't have a section in your development plans, whatever they're on, which is the bit where we get to when we get to SEND. That's not how it should be. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an add-on, it's not something separate, it doesn't have a separate chapter. It is inherent in everything that you're doing. So when you've got your section on teaching and learning, or your section on CPD or curriculum, SEND has to be part of it. So make sure it's part of it. And this is what it looks like, and it's called a transformation map, and it has a goal in the top right hand corner. It has some key things you're going to do to reach that goal, and there are some examples here, and then some activities that you're going to do in these boxes, and they're set out over time. In this case, over spring, summer and autumn 2020. You could do it over 3 weeks, you could do it over 3 days, you could do it over 3 years, you could do it over 6 half terms if you wanted to. It's up to you to move these lines around and make it work for you. So there we are, there's the template. You can, again, as in the previous ones I gave you, take these, alter it around, move the lines. All you do is click on them, move them around, and you can make your own plan if you feel that would be helpful. So I just wanted to show you that. By the way, on this one, you can see some activities as an example, shaded, green, red, and I'm not sure that's amber, but you know what I mean. So to represent the progress that's being made. It's great because it's a one-page overview. Why is it really good? Because leaders engage others And so we're talking about the theme of collective responsibility. How do you engage people? Simple, one-page tools, nice visuals are a really good way of engaging other people rather than long documents of prose. So there's an example. Some of you look at that and think, that's not for me, that's fine. Some of you look at it and think, great, I'll give it a go. And hopefully the same for the other templates I've shown you. I've got one other template to show you. I'm thinking of time. I'm not doing too badly. I'm about 50 minutes. So just last bit is I just wanted to just briefly touch on Ofsted. And I think I heard Sarah say at the beginning that Ofsted is going to be part of the, focused on in this seminar series. So this is just, take this by way of an introduction. I would just say about the Ofsted, I'll come to that in a sec. I would just say about the Ofsted framework, none of us at Whole School Send, and none of us, I hope, anywhere in the country do things just because Ofsted, to get through an Ofsted. None of us sat down one day when we were 18, 19 or in our 20s or whenever it was and said, I know, I'll become a teacher because if I become that teacher, then I'll be able to satisfy Ofsted when they come in and monitor me. We didn't do that. We said, we become teachers because we felt we could make a difference to the lives of the children. We had a calling to do that. And in our case at Whole School Send, we had a calling to do that for children with special education needs and disabilities. But the simple fact is that the Ofsted framework, as it is now, has become an asset to us all who are trying to improve the outcomes of children with SEND, because it features more heavily. And the Ofsted have stated themselves, they intend to be, or it intends to be, a force for improving outcomes for children with SEND in their equality, diversion and inclusion statement. So we see Ofsted in a sense as a friend. Doesn't feel like that when you're being inspected, does it? But in a sense, it's a friend of children with SEND because it will make a difference if we all understand it and implement our preparations. Key, obviously I'm not going through the framework with you, but I just wanted to show you these. A key section of the Ofsted Inspection Handbook is paragraph 353, where which is all about applying the education inspection framework in mainstream schools and special schools and specialist provisions. This is the things which is expected to see of leaders. So you're all leaders on this call. These are the questions you've got to ask yourself about your areas of responsibility. So at whole school level and at subject and phase level, so at all those levels. So I'm not going to take you through all of these, but there's 7 of them, by the way, so it's not a long list. There's 4 of them on this slide, 3 on the next. But how well leaders identify children with SEND. We just looked at the 4 broad areas of need and national patterns. Developing and adapting the curriculum we asked when we looked about the code of practice, additional to, different from, and so on. Involving parents and carers is so important, and co-production is so important. We all in our education profession now need to be taking opportunities to do that, listen to the voices of students and of parents and carers, and involve them in co-producing some of the things we do, so that it's less done to and more done with. And you will be interested to see that now the code of practice is tied in with the Ofsted framework, or I should say the other way around, because this is the new Ofsted framework from September 2019. The 4 broad areas of need, which I've articulated in this webinar, are so important for leaders to know. So there you see it written down. So I prepared this. Oh yes, before making the final judgment on overall effectiveness, the inspection team will evaluate the extent to which the school's education provision meets the needs of pupils with SEND. Gone are the days, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, when the Ofsted inspector comes in and said, I want to talk about SEND, I'll go and talk to the SENCO. They will talk to everybody about SEND through the course of the inspection, including pupils, to see what they say about their learning for SEND. So they'll talk about, that to subject leaders and phase leaders, not just with a SENCO. So I produced this template for you. It's my final template, virtually final slide. So I've taken those questions, those seven points from paragraph 353. I've added in 2 or 3 more, which I think are really helpful. And I'm inviting you by way of your whole school collective responsibility and by way of your preparation for inspection, but fundamentally by way of improving things for children with SEND and their families, to look at these and have meetings in your school at whatever level you need to. What's your response and what's the evidence that supports that response? And so in other words, what would a team see if they were going round? I've sent to Rachel, to Sarah, this as a template, a Word template, so you can edit it and use it as a tool. And I've also sent to Sarah the Education Inspection Framework and the School Inspection Handbook in Word format, which you can't normally get because they're PDFs, with highlighted every reference to SEND, just as reference documents for you. Now, she'll get them to you either after this session or for the session that's on Ofsted coming up. So I hope you'll find all these various tools helpful to you. And that's it from me. What are you going to do to become a more effective leader of SEND? I've left that as your reflection at the end of this. And I've done about 55 minutes, and I hope that's works out well for everybody. I'll stop sharing and let Sarah come back in and take over from me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, Malcolm. As ever, so much to take away from that. I think I use the term takeaways. There's going to be lots of takeaways from this webinar, and there are. We're going to send out the slide pack with all of the editable templates. But I just wanted, before you all rush off to fill in the templates and ask your questions, I just want to flag up our next webinar, which is on Thursday, the 2nd of December. And we're going to be hearing from SENCO colleagues from the North who've been inspected in the last term. I'm sure you'll agree that it's been a bit strange through the pandemic, and there was a break in kind of normal in inspections, and it would just be nice to hear from people who've been through that process, but how they engaged the rest of the school colleagues and leaders, and how they got that buy-in from the staff to drive SEND improvement, but also to deal with the inspection framework. So that is the 2nd of December. I'm hoping you are going to sign up, but we'll send all of those templates in advance. And I think it would be useful to just reflect on one of the templates, looking at the questions for leaders, and before you turn up to the next one, that might help you with a few questions to ask our colleagues who've been through recent inspection. Okay, and I saw that the chat pinging away there, mainly with just a lot of love for Malcolm's slides and templates. But I'm just going to scroll to see if I've missed any questions.
There's a question in the Q&A, Sarah, from Linda.
Yes, so this is about local advisors in Linda's area are pushing a universal design approach to teaching and learning for inclusion and SEND. So how does additional to, different from fit in with this? Because we're thinking SEND, additional to, different from, but then we're being pushed for a universal offer. I think that's what Linda's trying to say. So that's an interesting one. I would say, and probably if I jump in before Malcolm does, I think when we're looking at universal offers, we're looking at quality first teaching, principles of instruction, of getting that first step of teaching correct. But then I would probably say once we're moving into additional to, different from, it's when we're putting in the reasonable adjustments, additional interventions. Would you agree with that, Malcolm?
Well, I sort of do, but my initial response, I do, Sarah, I do agree with it. But I would like to say that this is part of your universal offer for children with SEND. So a universal offer, obviously high quality teaching for all children. I would, and I haven't thought about this, Linda, so thanks for the question because it's stimulating my thinking. But I would say part of the universal offer are your teaching strategies for children with communication needs and your teaching strategies for children with cognition and learning needs, and that all teachers know those strategies. They're still additional to, different from. They perhaps fall into that category of interventions and support, which they benefit SEND children, but they benefit all children. So they can be, in a sense, valuable for everybody. But I would say that's part of the universal offer and the universal design in a school. And I would say one needs to think about those by using the 4 broad areas of need. And as Sarah said, which is what I did agree with as well, once we get to targeted or specialist, then we're into something even more additional, and that wouldn't necessarily be part of the universal design approach.
Okay, thank you. We've had another question. Where do we find the analysed school performance document for our settings?
Okay, so I didn't see that question, but thanks for asking. So there are 2 documents which replaced Raise Online, everybody. They are the Inspection Data Summary Report and the Analysed School Performance document. And those are both available via a login on the Analysed School Performance Government website. Now, your head teacher, or you might be a head teacher on this call, but the head teacher of every school has a login, just like the head teacher of every school used to have a login for Raise Online. Now, the head teacher is, able to share that login with whomsoever he or she decides is appropriate to have it. And I would argue that leaders in a school are appropriate to have that sign in, that login. You wouldn't hand it out freely, but you would to your professional colleagues in the school so that they can use that document. What we found is the Analysed School Performance document contains all the data on children with SEN and EHCPs in your school in terms of absence, exclusions and outcomes. The Inspection Data Summary Report is a much shorter data summary. So fundamentally, whoever asked the question, you need to speak to the head teacher, tell him or her, give me the logo, please, the logon, sorry, so that you can access it yourself. Or at the very least, send you a PDF copy of those documents so that you can use them. I advocate, this is, if I may just finally say, sort of required understanding for SENCOs in schools. It should be something that's available for them because they can then do their analysis. You can watch, Fran might be able to tell you where you can go and see me talking about this in detail and how you can use these documents. But anyway, I hope I've answered your question.
I popped a link in, Malcolm, into the chat, and just to say that the IDSR was updated or released on the 12th of November, so they'll be hot off the press with a variety of different data sets and time lags.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, and we can add that into the slide pack as well for tomorrow. Okay, I don't think there are any other questions. So thanks for attending. Thanks to Malcolm, and hopefully we'll see you on the 2nd of December. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.